welcome to this session today. As a few words of introduction to myself and to the Improvement Service and what's going to happen today. So the Improvement Service was established in 2005. We provide support to officers and elected members in all 32 local authorities. We work on a range of different areas and have an elected member development programme with coaching, webinars and briefings, which I would encourage you to check out if you haven't already. My name is Judy Kilgallen and I joined the Improvement Service at the end of last year in a newly created role to develop and build their climate change activity. As we're all very aware, and I'm sure one of the reasons that you've signed up to come along today is local government is essential to green recovery from COVID-19, and the transition to net zero, whatever we call it, offers really wide-ranging benefits. But what does all this mean in practice for local authorities and elected members? Today, I am hopeful is going to be the start of conversations that are already happening in your local authorities and at national and international level as well. And I'm delighted that we have representatives from nearly every local authority in Scotland for what should be an interesting hour. I'm also hoping that the discussion today will help shape future work by the Improvement Service in this area, and so really looking for some feedback on that as well if we have time. The structure of today, we're going to have two introductory presentations from Councillor Aitken from Glasgow City Council and Councillor Vitrano from Fife. We will have both presentations and then that will be followed by Q&A and discussion, finishing at 12 or just before. We'll see how we get on. Please do use the chat box throughout for comments or questions. Be good to hear from you all as well, but given the number on the call, it might be that we myself and my colleague Miriam will sort of condense these and put them to the speakers and to everyone on the call. So hopefully that all makes sense and is around what you signed up for today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Councillor Susan Aitken from Glasgow City Council. She served as leader of the council since 2017 and is really providing leadership and direction in this pivotal year of COP26. So Councillor Aitken, I can't see you, but I hope you were there. I will stop sharing my screen and over to you.
Hi, sorry, my microphone was a little bit sticky there. Morning,
Perfect.
It's a pleasure to be here talking again to local government colleagues about climate action, about the COP and our role within that. Thanks very much to the Improvement Service for organising this morning's event. Some of you might have heard me say some of this already. I'm not going to make any apologies for that because the messages I think are bear repeating. They're worth hearing again and again, particularly in these final 5 months or so as we move towards COP26 being hosted in my city and in our country in Scotland. An incredibly exciting opportunity, and I'll say a wee bit more about that. I think we really couldn't have a time more ripe for us to be having substantive conversations about what this means for all of us in local government. The COP's visibility is rapidly increasing at home, and with that, I think a growing awareness of the opportunity that it presents for Scotland. I've had a really intense period of international engagement over the past year, and I'm really keen now to amplify the messages that I've been talking about with global peers, particularly cities, but increasingly national governments and international networks like C40 cities, for example, like Ickley, here on home turf in Scotland. Because the opportunities for each of our own local authorities and for Scotland as a whole extend so far and beyond hosting that 2-week summit in November, hugely significant in global and historic terms, though that is. This is not an event like other events that Glasgow has hosted in the past. The likes of the Commonwealth Games, the European Championships in 2018, they were brilliant. They were absolutely fantastic events. They've been incredibly important to Glasgow as a city and indeed to Scotland more widely. But this is something else. This is the most important international event probably in any of our lifetimes, and the outcomes from it are going to be pivotal for the future of our entire planet and for future generations. The climate emergency isn't going away. It isn't a vogue agenda that we've got to pay lip service to until the fad passes. It is a global priority, probably the global priority, and it needs to be a local priority as well. What Scotland has that no other nation on our planet has this year, and believe me, they want it, and they've been open in their enviousness of our status as the host, is COP26. And it means that the eyes of the world are on us, and they are already on us. And it gives us a generational opportunity to position ourselves as a nation and as local areas committed to a healthier, cleaner, more sustainable, more equitable future, with partnerships and willingness to capitalise on that opportunity. Scotland's climate action ambitions and policy agenda, our growing international reputation for business and technological innovation, the challenges from our past that we've been overcoming, and our incredible wealth of natural assets. I'm not sure that any other nation on earth has such a platform to showcase ourselves and our ambitions this year as Scotland does. COP26 can be the defining moment, not just for Glasgow, but for modern Scotland. Throughout Glasgow's road to the COP, I've always been trying to frame the climate emergency in terms and contexts that are relevant to the lives and challenges of ordinary citizens here in Scotland. And I do think that's critical. The climate emergency can't be seen as something remote or in isolation from day-to-day concerns, or for that matter, just about things that we're asking people to sacrifice. We must make it about lives, about communities, and about our economy being better and healthier. Of course, in Glasgow, as in any of our local authorities, we do have to acknowledge that sometimes responding to the climate emergency might not be the most common topic that residents are raising with us as local elected members. It's not the top of everyone's list, though it is absolutely becoming more so, especially among our younger citizens. But it isn't yet seen by everyone as something that has the same urgency or the same consequences as poverty, say, or housing issues, or as quotidian as litter or potholes. These, of course, remain vitally important issues and are still going to require collective action to address them. But taking action on climate issues isn't just compatible with delivering on many of our other social and economic goals at local level, or indeed our day-to-day service ambitions and priorities. Climate justice needs to be a key element of a local authority's priorities and outcomes for our citizens and our communities. Climate resilience here in Scotland is about ensuring that our residents have affordable and accessible public transport and active travel networks, minimising the severe public health impacts of congestion, about low carbon energy systems to deliver affordable warmth and address the blight of fuel poverty that we know still impacts on too many households, about identifying and creating more high quality green space, particularly in urban areas. All of this has to be mainstreamed into what we do in local government, not seen as a standalone agenda. So to give just one example, Glasgow's residents, and indeed residents across the Glasgow metropolitan region, regularly talk about their desire to see the Clyde return to being a centrepiece of city life. And the Clyde Mission partnership with Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise and the local authorities in the Glasgow City region is a fantastic opportunity to really open up what's actually Europe's biggest regeneration opportunity for economic, for social, for recreational and for residential use, and of course to harness the renewable energy potential of the river. But to do that, we need action to address flooding threat and to protect hundreds of thousands who live in communities close to the riverfront. Clyde Mission can not only be a huge catalyst for economic recovery, but also help us to adapt to and mitigate climate threat to communities along the river corridor. And that climate threat is as real for people as here in Scotland as it is for people in the global south who are currently suffering the greatest loss and damage from climate change. And the fact that climate change might not be uppermost in the immediate concerns yet of all of our citizens doesn't alter its fundamental significance and importance. Local politicians, like our colleagues at national level, have a responsibility to be honest about climate change and the urgency that's needed to address it. On this critical agenda, I believe that it's local elected members, local councillors, who are ideally placed to exercise community leadership on this issue. And I suppose this is as good a juncture as any to raise what I fear is one of the big obstacles that we, who very often find ourselves caught up in the visceral and tribal nature of local politics, will encounter. Climate action is it's too big an issue not to be challenged. And it's right and appropriate that we ask questions around priorities, around commitments, investments, their intended outcomes, and potential unintended consequences, particularly on the scale of the investments, the pace and scale of the investments and interventions that we are talking about. We're talking about billions and billions of pounds to be spent in a short space of time, really in the next decade, in order to reach national and indeed global targets on decarbonisation, on reducing emissions and reducing global heating. That's a lot of money to spend, and we absolutely need to ask the questions that ensure that that money is being spent as effectively as possible and with as many positive impacts as possible with every pound that we invest. But equally, it's too important for opportunistic point scoring. We are going to encounter entrenched ways of doing things of deep and long-term vested interests. And we do need to remember what's at stake when the chance for short-term headlines sometimes present themselves. Opportunism, cowardice, denial, all of those things risk doing a very deep disservice to our citizens. And while, of course, national government at both Scottish and UK levels must help resource and enable local climate action, we can't think that we can simply stop at sending a note to ask for more money from Holyrood or Westminster on this. It goes without saying local government is always going to want to have a lot more money from Holyrood and Westminster, and we should and will keep asking. But we're going to be bitterly disappointed if we rely on national or supranational governments alone to fund and deliver the transition to net zero. And I'll return to this very shortly. We, as the democratically accountable representatives of our communities, are entitled also to demand leadership, commitment and comprehension on climate issues from the senior officials within our organisations. Climate issues need to be genuinely and tangibly mainstreamed throughout local government organisational life, and it's our responsibility as local politicians, democratically elected, to insist on that. One very practical and pressing matter that's newly emerging is a need for a shift in some of the thinking and conversations about how we do transition and where the opportunities can come from. Many of you, I'm sure, will already be aware of the global messaging around COP26 just now, that it has to be the COP of action, going beyond policies and targets and onto the practicalities of achieving net zero emissions. The next decade is absolutely critical in scaling up the investments and interventions necessary for transition. And whatever is decided on the future of our planet in those high-level discussions between national leaders in November, it is going to be we at local level, whether in Glasgow, East Lothian, Angus, Orkney, or indeed in Pittsburgh or Bonn or in Paris, who will have to deliver on our own streets and in the households of our citizens. As I said a moment ago, government simply can't and won't be paying for all of this, so who will? And it's perhaps the crucial question that politicians at every single level have to address in this. Conversations around financing transition to net zero are still quite young, but they will, out of necessity, advance very, very fast. The financial world is increasingly looking at cities, at towns, at councils, at municipalities as sources of secure investment. And they've also got the consideration of seeking to invest in modern economies, and that the recognition that the cost of all of this now, however big it is, will be dwarfed later on if we don't take the action that's necessary now. While innovative financing might not be in an entirely new space for local government, and it's a space that we in Glasgow have particular recent experience in our funding of our equal pay settlement, for example, nor is it a new space for the financial and investment markets. The scale and urgency that we're looking at for this agenda is a new space for everyone, really. And it's a critical area where government at national level does hold the levers in ensuring that there's sufficient autonomy around borrowing powers, or indeed whatever financial instruments and powers might be required to support transition at local level. In recent months, we in Glasgow have joined colleagues from Open Society Foundations, the World Economic Forum, international development organisations, the World Bank, the financial sector, philanthropic organisations like Bloomberg Philanthropies, to discuss the challenges and the opportunities around COP and the financing of transition. And in the months ahead, we'll be extending that conversation right across the UK. But however that conversation emerges, Scottish local government has to be ready for it. We have to be ready for this new terrain that we'll be entering into. And we have to be ready for the scale of the investments and projects likely to interest the financial world. We're not talking about an intervention in just one town or city or neighbourhood, but across regions and even whole countries. We need to start thinking big around cooperation and shared agendas between each other to attract the interest and finance of investors for these large-scale interventions. So just as an example, what might a tidal barrage in the Forth Valley or Tayside look like, or a district heating network across the entirety of Ayrshire? The much closer cooperation that city and growth deals, for example, have already nurtured in Scotland put us in a really good position. As I said at the outset, the timing is not just right, but actually crucial for us to be having these conversations now. We don't need all the answers immediately, but we've got to, in the widest sense, as well as specifically on this matter, really consider how these global agendas affect us locally. Because in the end, it's we who will have to deliver so much of the practical decarbonisation action that will be needed to achieve national net zero ambitions. So COP26 is not just about Glasgow, and it's not just about policies and targets. It's about all 32 Scottish local authorities sharing knowledge and skills, identifying our local and national climate challenges, and working together to take the practical steps necessary, not just to secure the future of our planet, but also to deliver climate and social justice here in Scotland. Our window of opportunity is finite, but the opportunity that we've got here in Scotland is absolutely huge. Thanks for listening.
Great, thank you. Insert the virtual round of applause here. A huge thank you for taking the time to come today, Councillor Aitken. I think that was a really good introduction and captured so many of the sort of issues that are happening in this area with a real call to action. And that's really what I hoped to get from today, and I hope that others found that as useful as I did. You know, it's about how we translate this global event agenda and attention into local action and link this in with our broader priorities and issues. And it's happening now. You know that the adaptation is necessary now. So, yeah, I've seen a few comments come in. So please do keep doing that. And I'll hand over now to Councillor Vitreno, who is the convener for the Environment and Protective Services Subcommittee and has led on this work at Fife Council for a number of years, supporting a range of initiatives and projects, and I'm looking forward to hearing a different perspective from you. So over to you, Councillor Vitreno, and thank you again, Councillor Aitken.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me along today. I'm pleased to have been asked to try to make a contribution to this most important webinar. I share many of the views expressed by Councillor Aitken, particularly about challenging and questioning and making sure that the money is available, whether it comes directly from central government or local authorities are granted borrowing powers. And I also share a view about the effect that global agendas can have on local issues, but equally importantly, the effect that local actions can have on the global situation. Climate change is one of the defining challenges of our time. In 2019, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us we need to keep the change below 1.5 degrees centigrade. Council officers tell me that the World Meteorological Office's latest climate predictions assessed a 40% likelihood of temporarily reaching 1.5 degrees centigrade in the next 5 years. I think that points to a failure to act quickly enough over preceding decades, which now means that the window to prevent climate collapse is very small indeed. As Scotland hosts the COP26 conference, I think we are prompted to ask ourselves once again, what more can we do? At a meeting last year of Fife Council's Environment and Protective Services Committee, when the actions that are required to mitigate climate change were being discussed, one of the council's officers said, whatever we do, we have to do it together, and we have to do it now. I think that statement precisely summarises what is required. If we are to do it together, therefore, it's not just local authorities that must act. The situation in which we find ourselves as a society demands partnership action. That said, there are some things that only government can do. And I don't just mean the governments within the United Kingdom, but governments across the world. We need legislation to set the right policies, to control standards such as how we construct our new buildings and retrofit others, and to provide the necessary funding either directly or indirectly. We need worldwide legislation, for example, to ensure that all packaging material is such that it can easily be recycled, and we need to develop the technology that is required to enable that situation. Whereas elected members cannot cast the legislation that is necessary, they do have a role to bring these issues to the attention of government, and where necessary, to challenge government, for example, via COSLA or by responding robustly to consultations. As elected members, we all have our own ideas of what should be done by way of a green recovery and tackling the climate emergency and how quickly it should be done. But we have to be realistic and recognise that there are limits which prevent things being done as quickly as we would like. As elected members, we have to be aspirational, but we must be aspirational rational and strike a balance between what we would like to see and that which is possible. In all that we do, whereas we cannot take action globally, we must think of the possible adverse global consequences and take action locally to ensure that the global burden is not increased. What have we done in Fife? Well, elected members in Fife through the council have taken action right across the council's estate. The council is working towards zero waste, and to that end has introduced the 4-bin curbside waste collection service, which inter alia enables suitable feedstock for the council's anaerobic digestion plant, which in turn produces compost, which is used locally, and methane, from which heat and power are generated. At one time, 10% of the council's carbon footprint came from street lighting. So in over a decade of action, over 60,000 street lighting columns have been fitted with low energy lanterns and are programmable, so that maximum illumination is used only when it is needed. The council has introduced electric cars and vans to its fleet of vehicles. There are 2 council-owned district heat networks, both with substantial low-carbon energy supplies. The council has biomass heating systems in some buildings, and the council heats some buildings by way of a water source heat pump. And the council supports energy business, for example, through the Energy Park and Fife Renewable Innovation Centre in Metal and Green Business Fife. In short, a focus on sustainability can be seen across all policy areas in Fife. I see elected members having key roles in setting policy and priorities and being seen to lead or to be a champion. Not only does this help shape and guide direction through constructive comment, it also supports officers. Accordingly, the council has a reform agenda, which is informed by working groups in which every elected member can participate, thereby allowing elected members to identify priority areas. Through these working groups, reducing the impact of the climate emergency has been defined as a priority area, together with leading economic recovery, tackling poverty and crisis prevention, and community wealth building. I also see elected members having a part to play in championing communities by being the voice of climate communities, supporting officers to engage with local communities about climate change, and communicating the council's policy at local level. I also see a role in supporting communities to help them determine what is the best course of action for their area. For example, last year, Fife Council agreed to change the way it manages 10% of its maintained grassland. Not only will this help replace some of the 97% of flower-rich grassland which has been lost to the UK over the past 70 years, and be part of our action to help reduce the drastic decline of around 2/3 of pollinating insects, but it will also cut greenhouse gas emissions every year. So it is indeed a win-win-win situation. It was recognised, however, that the way in which green space is managed can be locally controversial and very sensitive. This means giving elected members the knowledge to make the case locally for the change. Did all members support it? No, they didn't, but a significant number did, and so too did the communities that they represent. What of the future? Well, I think that the scale and pace of change that is required will be really challenging. There will have to be policy decisions around housing. For example, should new build be to the passive house standard? In the more immediate future, there will be legislation relating to waste in the form of a deposit and return scheme, which will have a profound effect on the waste collection and recycling functions of local authorities. In the pipeline, there are big changes and new duties are being discussed for local authorities, including the Heat Network Scotland Act, which has already been passed and which requires local authorities to carry out a review to consider one or more areas in its area is likely to be particularly suitable for the construction and operation of a heat network. There will be local heat and energy efficiency strategies which will arise as a consequence of secondary legislation under the Act. And as I've already said, there will be the deposit and return scheme. Here in Fife, and looking to the future, the council is working to provide climate literacy training, initially to all elected members and staff, and then to roll it out to other organisations in Fife. The Leavin project, which I believe to be an exemplar in partnership working, sees the council working with other public sector partners to collectively help breathe life back into the River Leavin area and its communities, amongst other things, by recovering derelict land and reconnecting the communities and making them better places in which to live and work and which to visit. The Extend 100 project in Metal is looking to demonstrate hydrogen as a replacement for gas in domestic heating by identifying 100 houses where the occupants are willing to take part in the project. The Thornton-Leavin rail link is being reinstated thanks to the amazing work of the local community with support from the council and local government. Fife also hosts energy innovation with the Fife Renewable Innovation Centre and the Eden Centre near St Andrews, where the council is working with the University of St Andrews, which is looking at new standards of heat installation and a biomass heat network, which is very important research indeed, given the likely role that heat networks will play in the future. Fife Council and Fife Colleges are working towards constructing the new Dunfermline Learning Campus to passive house standards. Elected members can contribute right across the climate change agenda and bring about their own vision for the future. Everyone will have their own ideas of what that should look like. But in Fife, the council has agreed that that vision is for a Fife that is climate friendly, because the council has transformed the economy, infrastructure, land use and energy system to decarbonise how we live. A Fife that is climate ready, because the council has plans and projects to increase the resilience of Fife communities and the economy to help minimise the impacts from unavoidable climate change. And a Fife that is climate just, because the council has ensured that all Fifers and the Fife environment can benefit from this transition. We only have this planet on loan from our children. And when you get to my age, you realise that it is indeed a very short-term loan. And I'm sorry to have to say that my generation hasn't done a good job of looking after our children's inheritance. Hopefully, it's not too late to reverse the trend. But as has been already wisely said by a council officer, we must do it together and we must do it now.
Great, thank you so much again, Councillor Vachino. A real call to action on the end there, and you know, I think that you had some really practical examples of what Fife's been up to, of how you embed this across everything that you're doing, from the policy all the way through, and the role that elected members can have as leaders and being a champion. I like that of you know, challenging where appropriate, but championing these causes. So yeah, great. Thank you again to both of our speakers. The floor is now open, and we've got some comments in the box which I will go to. Oh, Councillor Miller, you're fastest hand first. We'll come to you first then.
Thank you very much, Julie. As chair of the local Audit and Scrutiny Committee, we held an investigation into climate change some years ago, and I see one of the committee members on here today as well. We made 12 recommendations about 2 years ago, which fortunately our cabinet agreed with every one of them. And they're taking that forward, but I would suggest that there's some things that need to be said, that as far as climate change is concerned. We all know that grass is a great carbon sink, as is trees, and how we marry that in with future housing developments, future green spaces for people. Because the one thing that we can manufacture many things, but the one thing we cannot manage is more land. We just cannot do that. We've got to make use of the land we have. The agricultural land is used for producing food. We have to produce enough food to feed our own population. We got to grow our own food, because if we decide that we want to have open spaces, we want to have trees, we want to have housing developments, we might not be able to grow our own food. We have to import it. We have to educate our communities that they can't get strawberries in January, because we can't grow them in this country in January unless it's under glass, under heating. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. Then we go to transport. And the great thing at the moment seems to be electricity. Electricity comes at a price. It's not the be all and end all. I was once the councillor for the biggest wind farm in Europe. And every one of these turbines will die in debt. They cost an enormous amount of money. The thing is, when it comes to a price, solar and wave power are going to be expensive to install, but they will probably be less expensive to run than wind. As I say, it's a great deal of thought needs to go into what's going to happen in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller, and yeah, really interesting to hear the work that you did on the 12 recommendations, and trying to sort of split this into, you know, understand the different sectors, but the work that needs to be done, and education, I think, is really really at the heart of that, you know, at all levels. Councillor Bill Brown, I think you were the next hand I saw go up. Thank you.
Some people are talking about this has been new and just happening. Excuse me. But in actual fact, I was part of the nuclear free local authorities and many of our old nuclear installations are coming to the end of their life, but we need the electricity they produce. So what was the alternative? So back then it wasn't just a case of let's knock down all the nuclear stations, but what do we put in its place? So we then started to talk about wind farms, about tidal barrage, and so on. And that led on. In my own council, about 18 months ago, we sort of drew some various strands together and decided to have a climate change committee, which I elected to go on because of my previous experience and also my love of nature and the beautiful countryside that we have. We were, about a year ago, our council meeting was invaded by Extinction Rebellion, who came and stood with their banners and were shouting and so on. And then we said, well, excuse me, but we have so many electric vehicles, we have biomass boilers, we are building a new school for special needs with a particular type of heat source. And they said, oh, we didn't realise you were actually doing this. And that is one of the things perhaps we need to get out, that we are actually doing things at the moment. It's not a case of starting today, tomorrow, next week. We have actually been doing these over the years. As Councillor Vitriano said, we have actually got things in place to help. So one of the big things and questions, I suppose, is how do we educate all councillors that we need to be making this change, and also the wider public? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Really, again, really good comment, and then a question at the end. I'll take that back to yeah, Councillor Aitken. Thank you. I was going to come with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting point. A lot of us, I think, would like to can maybe get a wee bit defensive about these things, and we'd be like, oh, but we've done this and we've done that, and we're exactly the same in Glasgow. We've done loads of local stuff that we'd want to be able to point to that shows that we're not strangers to this agenda. We've understood climate change and ensuring that we have an environmentally aware policy structure for a long time. But the reality is, and I think this is often the point that people like Extinction Rebellion are trying to make, and why it's important that we listen to them. In actual fact, we had Extinction Rebellion sat on the working group that drew up our climate emergency action plan in Glasgow, which has just been taken through committee. And we went into the election in 2017. So my administration had a target of 2037 for carbon neutrality. I'm not going to pretend that was a science-based target. I think we might have plucked it out of thin air. But we, in fact, I remember how we chose it. It was because it was 10 years ahead of Copenhagen, and we thought we'd at least 10 years behind Copenhagen. So roughly we should, but we knew it was ambitious, and we thought it was ambitious. But we're on 2030 now. And that's been the influence of people like Extinction Rebellion. But we've had to shift our thinking a lot and realise it isn't about a small passive house development here or a passive house school there, or a community renewables project. Important though those are, and they are crucial, and we should keep doing those small actions. It's actually though about retrofitting nearly 500,000 houses across the Glasgow City region. Basically pretty much every house that was built before this millennium and possibly after that as well is going to have to be retrofitted to make it sufficiently energy efficient. And every single house that's currently heated with a gas boiler in Scotland, which is a lot of them, if not the majority, is going to have new heat systems put in place. I think it's that kind of scale that we need to get our heads around now. local action is enormously important, and it remains critical because we need to continue to be able to connect with communities on this agenda. And you know, it's difficult for communities to get their head round the scale of some of these massive infrastructure projects that we're going to have to undertake. So a community renewables project, you know, a retrofitting of a local school to be passive house, these remain, they're brilliant things to do, and they're really important. But those of us who have the strategic responsibilities as elected members are also going to have to think bigger than we've ever done before. And it's been a challenge for me. I won't deny it in the slightest. It's really only been in the past 18 months that I've been able to get my head around the scale of what's needed, and the kind of interventions that we're going to have to put in place collectively. And it's why I was talking about the financing of it being so important, because if we're going to deliver at the scale and the pace that we need to, we're going to have to get some serious money behind us doing it. And we certainly don't have that resource at local level. National governments don't have that resource either, but the resource is out there. And I suppose what we have to do as local authorities is expand our capacity and our ability to engage with global financing on that scale, which isn't ordinarily something that we do day to day.
Great. Excuse me. Great, thank you. And yeah, you know, I think that my only you know, this point, and I see a comment in the chat just come through there around that the focus on innovation and pilot projects, but as you say, there's the need for scale, and there's the need for you know, all of this to be happening now. I would add just on the point around education and training, the Improvement Service is working with the Scottish Cities Alliance to deliver carbon literacy training for elected members. And I know Glasgow have been involved in the past with this, and it's something that we're looking at how we can roll out as well, of just, you know, building that awareness and you know, ability to make some of these difficult decisions. Councillor Heather Anderson, thank you for waiting so patiently. We'll come to you now.
Thank you. I was once told a long time ago never to mistake the top of the trench for the extent of the horizon. So I'm really grateful to Susan for introducing urgency, scale, and ambition. So my question is about what Susan thinks we can do to ensure that councillors are brought up to speed in terms of carbon literacy and ambition. And more importantly, you mentioned there, Susan, about council officers. You know, I was told on Friday that I couldn't expect action to be detailed in our route map because it would make it a very long report. So that whole thing about saying we have to stop making platitudes about climate change and actually start getting to the data and the numbers and the details. So what do you think we could do to increase the knowledge of councillors, and as importantly, increase the knowledge of officers and ensure that they are not lagging behind in terms of their ambition?
Ross has already talked about carbon literacy training. And there's some really, we did it in Glasgow for elected members. We're rolling it out to officials now as well, and across the city. Ross said they've done it in Fife. That's a really good starting point. There's Zero Waste Scotland do an excellent, it's a course that you do over a series of weeks. It's really good, and I would highly recommend it. It's pitched at a level for people both who are starting from scratch and who know quite a lot. There's something in it for folk at every level, but you will come away with, I think, a much clearer understanding, even if you know a lot already, a clearer understanding about how to communicate this to your constituents, to residents, to communities, how to work with them on this agenda, but also the demands to make of your officers, and what to insist from your officers. Hopefully, and one of the things I suppose we'll see coming out of COP is, and I would hope to see coming out of COP is stronger actual regulation, like an insistence that this is done, you know, so at global and national level, coming down to local level, really not leaving us with any choice. the quid pro quo of that is that we then say in return, right, you fund us then and you make sure that we've got the levers. And I saw a quick comment, I didn't see the entire thing, but just going in the chat there about it's absolutely right. There's an inherent fairness issue here in working with global financial institutions, and it can't be up to our local residents to pay for this. Absolutely not, whether that's in the case of new heat systems and potentially more expensive renewable sources of heat, or whether it's simply in paying for the financing. That is where national government absolutely has the responsibility, because it's not and it can't be left up to local government to use our resources, which are there to deliver essential local services, to also fund the debt of transition, if you like. So that's a really crucial point. I didn't see who it was that made it in the chat, but it's a very important thing. And absolutely, your officers need to be thinking about that.
Great, thank you. Great question there and response. Councillor Vitrina, I was just wondering if you wanted to come back on that as well. When I first met you, you talked about that relationship with officers and the work that's been done in Fife. So just to give you an opportunity there if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, and in common, I'm sure, with many other local authorities, we are very fortunate in Fife. We've got a sustainability team that is highly knowledgeable and very skilled. And it's a question of using the resources that you've got. That sustainability team working with the offices of the improvement service are putting together a climate literacy package, and from which every other member of staff will benefit, and every other elected member will benefit. And as I think Councillor Aitken said, it doesn't matter how much you know. You will always learn something new, and that's certainly true as far as I am concerned. We're not going to sort this overnight. Everybody's not going to become aware overnight. But unless people like elected members are aware of what needs to be done and talk to their community about it, I don't think we're going to get very far. So a climate literacy programme across every local authority, I think, is a really good start.
Great, thank you. Great. I think next was Councillor Peter Henderson. I am aware there's some other hands up. I'm working through them, I promise, so please bear with me.
Thanks very much, and thanks to Ross and Susan for the introduction. It's just a quick question, really. We've covered it about education, and it's a great ambition to have all local authorities have literacy awareness. I think we need to move forward to explain to people the actual true costs of doing this, the fact that we have no choice if we want a world to live in, and there was a comment in the chat box regarding rural issues. That is a massive problem with no alternatives. So it's the education of the public I'm interested in, and how we can work with the service and across councils to put forward an education programme to the public. A lot of people still don't accept this is happening. And when they look at, for example, we've just done a review of retrofitting houses. The cost runs into millions, and that's just for 23 houses. And sometimes it's not possible. And it's the decisions we have to make. So it's about how we get a further education programme going across councils, across government, across to the public. And that's the most important bit, because we have to have community buy-in if we're going to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, and definitely agree that there's education and awareness raising that's needed at so many different levels, you know, from elected members through to as you say, through to business and community. Councillor Vitrina, yes.
Yeah. How do we get it across the public? It's not going to be easy. It's a question of attitude, and we all have the attitudes that we have because of all of our experiences up to and including this minute. I mean, in Fife, we can't even get the public to properly use the recycling services. They seem to be totally unaware that every time they contaminate a recycling bin, that's a cost to the community, a financial cost to the community, never mind the environmental cost to the community. The last time we did a waste analysis, 8% of the landfill bin was glass by weight, 8% by weight. That represented a loss to the council of something like £34,000 in income, and a landfill tax bill in excess of £300,000. That had to be paid by council taxpayers. Now, if we can't get the public to understand simple things like that. You know, how much more difficult it's going to be for them to embrace and understand, you know, broader issues. It's a question about attitude, and I'm not confident that you can change the attitudes of people as old as I am. I think we've got to start young, start in our schools, and make sure the right attitude is embedded there, and then it'll stay with people for the rest of their lives.
Thank you, Councillor Bacona. You've mentioned age a couple of times, but I think we're all part of this system, and we all have the power to change and be part of it. But yeah, definitely. And I see a comment that came into the chat there around that some members of the public may be better informed or perhaps better engaged than you know some others who are in positions in local authorities, and it's how you build on that and develop it. Councillor Devine, thank you for waiting. Would you like to come in?
Hello. There's been so much talked about. I just want to comment on a few things. I was on another webinar where Dumfries and Galloway were talking about having a citizens' assembly, a local assembly. I mean, I know there was a national one, and I think people gained a great deal of information and knowledge and really changed their attitudes to climate change through that. So I think it's valuable to do that on a local level as well. And I think we'll have a fight on our hands in Angus here, because we don't even have, we have a climate change member officer group, but we don't have an officer who is dedicated to that yet. So we really do have a fight on our hands. But I find what you were talking about, Susan, about the investment, just how do local authorities get access to that? Presumably, obviously, you have to work together with other local authorities, but we really need to know the pathway to accessing that, because otherwise we really need to know what kind of projects to work up and with whom. Thanks.
Thank you, and I think it's interesting how the sort of concept of financing and going back to Councillor Aitken's initial comments around that funding is needed, and it's how you are innovative in the approach to that. Councillor Aitken, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I'm actually literally answering that question for someone in the chat right now as you were asking, Lynn. Yeah, it is crucial. Capacity is going to be really important here. Just understanding how we even begin to have these conversations with people like the World Bank, for example. It's not something that we do on a day-to-day basis, and local authorities, by and large, certainly not. You know, maybe the Mayor of New York does, but I don't, by and large. I've just sort of started learning how to have these conversations in the past few months. So I'm working just now with the Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, who I know Glasgow's connected with through the UK's Core Cities network. So we've started some of these conversations to try and get, I suppose, the financial institutions to start coming and talking to us and telling us what they want. But even that's not quite enough either. I think COSLA's got a crucial role here in identifying the capacity that's required across local government, because I think just leaving it up to individual local authorities alone is going to be really, really challenging. This is something on a bigger scale than our finance directors deal with ordinarily. We're doing some work in Glasgow just now, which I hope will be able to serve perhaps then as a model for others, where we're pulling together, we've appointed a green economy manager, he just started last week, and we are pulling together a green investment prospectus. Now, we do an investment prospectus regularly in Glasgow to take to things like MIPIM, but this is different. It's not hotels and office buildings and things like that. It's stuff like a Clyde barrage, a tidal barrage, or putting a roof over the M8, or that retrofitting that I talked about, or heat networks, and it's billions of pounds worth of potential investment, almost all of which will have to be financed in a hybrid way as well. It's not just going to be one financial model that pays for these things. So it's a new challenge for us. I think the work that officers are doing on it is fantastic. It's looking absolutely brilliant. It's nearly finished, and we're going to be launching that, I think, next month. And certainly it will be going out widely before COP happens, because we've been really focused on getting ourselves into a position to be kind of ready for COP when we've got all this particular kind of international focus on the city. But I hope that it will be able to be a model for local authorities across Scotland, in partnership as well, to look at, okay, what are our local examples? What would we identify as being the equivalent of, say, those 500,000 homes in the Glasgow city region, or our equivalent of a roof over the M8 to capture emissions? And what are the potential commercial returns for that for an investor as well? So it's been a new piece of work for us, but hopefully it will be something that can set a kind of, not a standard's not the term I'm looking for, just an example that others can then draw on. And also, you know, I shouldn't be offering them up like this, but I'm sure the Invest Glasgow team in our council would be happy to speak to your officials about how, because it's been a big mind shift for them as well. It's been a different way of working for them, about how they got their heads around it and the processes that they went through to think about inward investment in a different way.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Aitken. It's really exciting developments and good to hear about it. And I did ask of, you know, what role the IS and COSLA could have in it, and it's you know, this concept around the financing and the how we can capture the best practice, and really interested to see how Kit England takes the direction there, and to work with him and yourselves on maybe perhaps a future session around financing. It seems like that's been a really key area that people are interested in. I'm conscious of the time. Councillor Bill Boyd, we'll come to you as the final question or comment, please, and then we will finish. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. I will be brief. In Highland, we have an active climate change working group, engaging members and officials. But and we've got a lot to offer from Highlands in terms of sustainable energy and so on and so forth. And I'd really like to have some exchange of ideas about that with you. But I'm going to just ask a simple question, but it's almost like a wee bit of a challenge. What can this group do to help change attitudes, to give the opportunity to change attitudes? Public generally, planners, businesses, councillors and officials all need to approach this in different ways from what we're used to. And I think that is the big challenge, changing attitudes. So what can this group do? Just to give you an example, people are wedded to their cars. That's probably more so even in Highlands than in some of the more urban areas. But what can we begin to do to get people to be open to the idea of opening streets for people by closing them to traffic, transferring to electric sources of energy? We don't need to park outside shops in order for the businesses to be successful. When we go abroad, we see many of the European cities don't have parking in the streets at all. Anyway, just a few things, but I mean, I think the big challenge is to change people's way of thinking and attitudes. And I'm just wondering what this group can do or help to do to get that debate going more. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Boyd. And I'm afraid I am going to leave that one hanging, but I think it was a really great summary of a lot of what we've spoken about today, about this need for a change in attitudes and that really critical role that the group on this call can play. So what I will do from our side is the session has been recorded and we will share that round. I will also go through the chat and pull out the themes that were coming from that and make sure that you all see that and you can share that more broadly in your organisation. And really, hope that, like I said at the start, I'm incredibly grateful to you all for coming along today, particularly to our speakers, but to all of you. You all have a very busy agenda, and I'm looking forward to working with you to develop how the IS and myself can support you with that, and that knowledge exchange is really kind of coming through, and it's what we can do to facilitate that. So I will end there. I ran a minute over, my sincerest apologies, but I will finish with just a huge thank you again, and I hope to work with you all soon to develop this agenda.